Um, so good morning, everybody. It's really great to be in a space where I know everyone. And you know me. What you might not know about me is I work in an organization here in Marin County called Community Action Marin. And we are an anti-poverty direct service advocacy organization. So my organization, Community Action Marin, one of the things that we do, and you might have seen our mobile outreach vans around the community, is we do outreach to people experiencing homelessness on the street. It's our care teams. They're all over Marin County. That's one of the most visibly in the community things that people know us for. But housing and affordable housing is something that we work on. And it is the biggest issue that we see across all of our programs. We do early childhood education. We do financial coaching. We do lunches for seniors. We do all sorts of different things. And housing is the issue. Every year when we do our community needs assessment, it comes up as the number one issue. I think all of us who live in Marin and part of this congregation, we're aware of the housing crisis that Marin is experiencing and the entire Bay Area and the entire state of California, frankly, is experiencing. So as Scott mentioned, this November, there will be a ballot initiative around raising funds for affordable housing on the ballot in the Bay Area. And it is being talked about, and one of the reasons my agency and I am involved in this is it's being talked about as a once in a generation kind of game changer opportunity. We do not get this opportunity all the time. And, you know, there's a lot of talk about the solutions to housing crisis, to homelessness. We know what the solutions are, and they have to do with housing. And so that is something that we have on the horizon, the near horizon. And I think the time between now and getting to November is us making the choices to pursue the solutions, because we know what status quo produces, and it's not more housing, and it's not solutions to housing and homelessness. We need to make choices in our policies that really elevate that. So that's what this initiative is about. Before we jump into all of that, I do want to start with just a point of reflection for each one of us. So if you want to put up the slide, Scott. One of the ways that we are really talking about and framing this issue is asking people to reflect on, what does home mean to you? Because I think that it's something that it's so foundational for all of us, but I don't know how much time we all spend thinking about it on a regular basis. So even just taking a moment to think of a word or something for yourself, what home means to you. It could be a physical thing. A home is often a physical reality. It also is a spiritual reality in terms of what that means. So just to take a moment and think about that, and maybe the flip side of, if you didn't have a home or your home was in jeopardy, what does that mean to you? How does that impact you? And folks online, I'll try to keep turning so you're not just looking at kind of the back of my head. So from that point, from that place, maybe just inviting you to, throughout this, to hold that maybe off to the side a little bit. We all have a personal connection to this issue because we all are bodies that need to be housed in all the ways that that might mean. All right, so we can go on to the next slide, please. So again, I think many of us are familiar with different aspects of the housing situation. I'm going to hit on a couple points that really stand out, I think, to illustrate the myriad of ways that housing is an issue in our community. Some of these you may be more or less familiar with. About a third of the residents living in Marin County are renters. So we've got a big homeownership population, but we do have a significant population of people who are in rental housing. And when you think about fair market rent, every time I hear this quoted or a different version of it, it's shocking to me. So currently, 2-bedroom rental unit in Marin is over $3,000 a month. Very costly. You know, the increase in the cost of housing in Marin over the past decade, is just dramatically increased. We've got almost half of the households in Marin County who spend over 30% of their income on rent. That is a pretty standard definition of affordability. We all know that that has a whole variety of what is actually affordable, but in many public policies, that 30% threshold is a standard of affordability that HUD and other places use. So almost half of our community is spending more than that on housing, just to be housed. We've got over 1,000 individuals experiencing homelessness, and this is a recent point in time count that we do. That's probably a very significant underestimate of that number, and it's a moving target. In the work that we do, we see people aging into homelessness, just moving. It's not housing instability is very present in the people that we serve in our agency and in our community. When we think about, we know that Marin is a very older population in terms of just the number of people at certain age who are seniors in our community, and 41% of Marin households that have senior residents are considered low income, that are falling in that threshold. And that's not surprising. A lot of people's income changes, of course, in that point of life. Another thing is thinking about the impact on climate and the connection between housing and climate. We know that 62% of Marin workers live outside of our county and commute in every day. So when we think about housing, and one of the resistance to people wanting to build housing is it's going to increase traffic, it's going to cause all these things. Our traffic problem is very much driven by the fact we have so many people coming in and out of our county. It's not people just driving around who are here in Marin. And so there's a lot of data to break these even further down. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. So there's more you can learn about this. But some of these things that talk about the impact of housing, it impacts our economic reality in the county. It impacts the environmental impact. It impacts our quality of life. Different populations are disproportionately impacted by the housing crisis. So all of these things are part of our mix in terms of just where we are right now. You can go to the next slide, please. Related to this is when we think about the regional housing crisis and what are the things that we need to find solutions for, there's a couple important aspects. So currently right now, as evidenced by the homeless population, et cetera, we don't have enough housing to house the people who are here. This isn't about new people coming currently right now. So you see that the high rent burden, which I talked about before, the numbers of people who are experiencing homelessness, the commuter strain, all of that is part of the mix. And you might also be aware that the state has, over the past couple of years, taken a couple of really assertive measures, basically saying to localities, you need to be building affordable housing and just housing period to address some of these issues. So Marin is one of those where we have requirements of how much housing that we need to be built, as do all other jurisdictions. And we are very behind in that. The Bay Area is very behind. Marin is very behind those goals that are being set for us. One data point that kind of illustrates how far behind. So over the past 15 years, we built 346 homes for every 1,000 people coming to be in this area. So we're really out of whack in terms of the amount of housing that we're building. And we're really essentially depending on other communities, other counties, for people to just kind of go to those other areas and figure out how to do it. And we'll just kind of stay here doing what we do in Marin. So really offloading that burden to other places. I don't know, I know there's some people who are involved in building and things in our congregation and understand this, but housing is a complex issue, and building in Marin, as we all could probably understand, is very complex. It's very expensive because of the cost of living, and also because of the length of time to really get a project online. And oftentimes you have 7 or 8 different funding sources that have to come together to build housing, and the longer that it takes to make all those dots and T's cross and connect, the cost just continues to go up. So the actual amount of funding available is one of the biggest barriers to housing in Marin and building more housing. This is a challenge that is decades in the making. This is true across the state of California. We have not been keeping pace in building, preserving the types of housing that we need. And so it's not a quick fix. We're not just going to suddenly, because of how costly and time intensive it is to build, but also because we've dug this hole for decades, and it's going to take significant change and significant time for us to dig out of it. But this is something that, again, we know that there are solutions, and we can choose those things that are going to help us move in that direction. We could take baby steps if we want, but that just pushes the finish line out, or we can take bigger leaps. We can go to the next slide, please. So one of the ways that really trying to illustrate that this issue is front and center for Marin. So the County of Marin, I think every year, maybe every 2 years, does a survey of the community asking what issues are most important to you, and the Board of Supervisors pays some attention to that, I would imagine, to set their goals of what they want to work on. And housing and homelessness is top of the list. That's what people in Marin want to see solved. I mentioned our agency does the same type of survey, similar, and housing again comes out on top, that we know this is a problem. But I think what is not always kind of front of mind is the ways that the issues that we all impact. So I'm not struggling with housing instability, but there are a lot of ways that the housing crisis impacts me in my day-to-day living and my quality of life. So there's lots of reasons why people might come to this issue. They don't necessarily need to care about it for the same reason I do, but there's a lot of angles to come at the issue. So kind of posing some of these things, and some of these might feel familiar to you. So our schools are experiencing a housing or a recruitment crisis. Teacher turnover is very high. Novato is pursuing, an initiative to build workforce housing for its educators, because they did a survey and almost 50% of their teachers said the high cost of housing is causing them to think about leaving the district. So you get somebody in, they're there for a year or two, they can't afford, and they're going to move on. And so we've got this constant turnover, which you can imagine undermines that relationship with kids and the ability of education to be effective. How many of you have to wait longer than what you would expect or desire to see a specialist, any sort of health specialist, where you call and they say, we can see you in 3-6 months? I had that experience myself, and it was shocking. A lot of these things are complex. They're not about one thing only, right? But housing is a common thread across all of them. Folks at Kaiser and Marin Health, those two big institutions, they cannot hire the staff they need. Medical professionals of all types, doctors, nurses, special, technical people, they can't hire them. And so that pushes wait times out, and that pushes care in a different direction. Restaurants that are closing in weird hours, they're open till 8 p.m. and then everything shuts down. It's because they can't get staff. So they're really squinching, in terms of, that's an official word, squinching their workforce into, the best block of time that they can cover. So, some of these are obvious. The traffic, again, is the commuting, pharmacy lines, grocery lines, just waiting for some of these basic services. So everybody in our community is impacted in one way or another by this affordable housing crisis. Can you go to the next slide, please? So a solution, and I don't mean to say, and I don't know if anybody would, to say that we have a solution that's going to fix this. There's not one, there's many. I want to give a quick bit of background on the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, or BAFA. There's tons of acronyms in this whole kind of thing, so I'm going to try to not use them. But so this is a regional public authority that was created in 2019. It works across the 9-county Bay Area, and I think there's a little over 100 cities. And the idea is, this is an issue that's way too complex for just one entity to try and solve. So like the town of San Anselmo does not have the resources, the expertise, the capacity to try and solve housing in San Anselmo. And it doesn't make sense. We're in this urban, kind of very interconnected. People go to this community to shop, and they go 2 communities away to work if they're lucky. And so we're interconnected. So the legislature, the state legislature, created this body with that understanding, as we need a regional body to look at this, think about it, come up with solutions, put things together. So that is BAFA, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. They are the ones behind putting forward this bond measure on the ballot. So in late June, they've been talking about it for months and months and months. They voted to officially put it on the ballot. I understand that it will be called Regional Measure 4. That's my sense, but more on that coming soon. So one of the main things that BAFA does is really to transform the way affordable housing is financed, because that is such a critical element to getting housing built. So that's the background of who's bringing this ballot forward. It's this regional body. So we have elected officials from Marin County who sit on the BAFA board. South Marin Supervisor Stephanie Moulton-Peters is one of them, and Pat Eklund, who's a city council member in Novato, are the 2 people from our region who sit on the full BAFA board, and then they have subcommittees and all sorts of stuff like that. So we have representation in Marin. Next slide, please. So the bond itself, as I'm sure you've all been seeing and reading, there will be a lot of ballot measures on the November ballot. That is true in presidential election years. That's just the way it goes. You wouldn't see an initiative like this on a non-presidential because turnout shifts. And so the idea is needing to put it on. So that's why there's so many, in part. So the affordable housing bond is a $20 billion bond measure, very significant. Again, it'll be on the 9 counties. So it'll be on our ballot in Marin and all the other 9 county Bay Area. It's being led by Santa Clara County. It's a technicality. So when you see kind of, they do the proponents and the who are bringing it, it will be those organizations listed. The way that the funding will be allocated is based on a formula. So each geography, Marin included, will get a portion of the money based on our assessed kind of value and portion of that 9 county Bay Area. And so that with the 20 billion bond, that will be about $700 million for Marin County, a very significant amount of money.
Say that number again.
700 million for Marin County. Yep, of the 20 billion. And the way that it's built and structured is the decisions on how Marin spends that money will be determined in Marin. BAFA is not going to decide. There's some parameters about how much is for the production of new housing. So three or 4 Ps is what we talk about in the housing ecosystem of what do we need to solve the affordable housing crisis. We need production of new housing. We don't have enough. That's building. We need to build more affordable housing. The second P is we need to preserve existing affordable housing. So we have housing that is designated affordable. We want to put the measures in place to make sure that's protected so we don't lose ground. Tenant protections. So there's a lot of ways that we want to make sure that tenants who are in an affordable unit can stay. And then the fourth, which is sometimes added, sometimes not, is to prevent homelessness. Those are the ways that we as a whole can solve the affordable housing crisis. So the formula of the 700 million is allocated across the first 3, not the fourth. So there will be a process that the county will lead for public input on how we determine that we want to spend that money here in Marin County, and all of the localities will do that as well. So this is not an outside reach of telling us what we need to do. It will be our decision as Marin voters and residents. And so the way that this bond is essentially funded, it's a general obligation bond, and it's through property taxes. So if you're a homeowner, you have a tax bill and it has the assessed value of your home, not the market rate value, the assessed value that your taxes are based on. And so this cost of the $20 billion bond is about $200 a year for each $1 million of value for your home. So that would be an added line item that will show up on your tax bill based on that assessed value and the value of your home. All right, next slide, please. So then that's the cost. And then think about what's the impact. And there's been a lot of analysis, as you can imagine, about what would this do. So for the first, and the central focus of this is to build more housing. So producing and preserving upwards of 90,000 affordable homes, and overall housing over 1 million or about 1 million households with low income. So again, it's affordable housing. The focus is on that lower income level. It's also a job creator because people need to build those homes. They need to preserve and do whatever is needed for that. So the estimates are, just under 60,000 jobs annually. This is again across the region. And there's also state and local taxes and other things that by all of that work, that kind of increase in the economy that this is going to generate that has other ripple effects. So increasing tax bases locally, and then in terms of income in California and different funding streams that can be leveraged. So one of the things, as I mentioned, when we build affordable housing, you might have 7 or 8 funding streams that you're braiding together as a developer. And that we're able to then, if you have match money, can pull from other sources. So BAFA, the bond, it could be a pool of money that developers could pull from to braid with other sources and be able to leverage additional money. So that's an estimate of about 76 billion in additional funding that we could leverage if we had this pot of money to add into those equations. Next slide. So I just want to pause there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I don't know if maybe better to save that to the end. I just want to get through, but I want to go back to the what home means to you. I was remiss in not bringing these postcards for you all to fill out this morning. But we have been out in community at tabling events, asking people to reflect on that question. And we have had some young people here filling them out so that we can send them into elected officials. And so here you have two, one of them is, what home means to me, and a little girl named Gwen, aged 4, from Novato. Everybody should have a home. And another child from San Anselmo, home means a safe place to live and where you can be yourself. So even, talking with children, and I have one from Everett in here later that I'll show you. It might be the next slide, actually. But they get it. So this is Everett's, that I am loved and safe. That's what home means to him. And so really young children can think about this idea of what does home mean to you? And they know and can speak about it. And they speak about it for themselves, but also there's the sense of everybody. This is something that's important for everybody to have. So it's been a really interesting exercise. So I think that, again, this is not some policy issues are more abstract. They don't necessarily directly impact me, but the idea of home and having a home that is secure, that is stable because you can afford it, you're not having to worry, that is foundational for our well-being and our wholeness as human beings. So thinking about how that's important to us and how we can be part of that for other people in our community who maybe don't have the same privilege that I have. Next slide, please. So that's really the question, I think, that's before us, and this is what's before the voters, is what kind of Marin County do we want to be? Do we want to step towards? Do we want to create in the future for people, young people, future generations? This doesn't move quickly. It's, a lot, social policy and social change takes a lot of time, but we're looking to the future of Marin. What do we want it to be? And I think that's a really important driving question as to then what do we do? What's the solution? What are the steps we want to take? So again, tying it back to poverty is a policy choice. This is the position of my agency. This is what we do. It's not a given. We've made choices that produce the Marin that we have now historically, and some of them are not pretty at all. We get to choose forward direction and changing those. And together we can do that. This is brought before the voters, and and I know that a lot of people have different feelings about public policy by ballot measure, and I'm one of them included, as a former lobbyist, as part of my job, and seeing the way policy gets made in various forms. There's definitely some questions about that. So part of the work that our agency is trying to do, this coalition, this is the regional coalition that we're a part of. I took this out of my window at my house, but this is the one thing I thought to grab on the way out the door. We can speak up for the types of policies we want. So really, again, it's a reflection as you think about, your vote in November on this, but all the other things that we all get to vote on, because we have that privilege in this country to do that. What are the values that you want to see reflected in our public policy on housing? What things do you hold dear that you want to be part of as we come together in community as government, which is what we get to do? Pulling from what some of the kids said, everyone deserves safe, affordable housing. I believe that. I believe housing is a human right. It's not for some, it's for all. And we also know, again, about the status quo. We have, Marin kind of leads the state. We've kind of slipped between 1 or 3rd in the most racially disparate county in the entire state of California. There's a lot of things that Marin is number 1 on that are really great. This is not one of those. And so the steps we take in our public policy has direct impact on that, or doesn't, and maintain status quo. Next slide, please. So the group that my organization is a part of, and hopefully you'll have maybe seen and we'll continue to see more and more of, is we've formed a local coalition called Housing for All Marin. We're an offshoot of the Bay Area Housing for All. There's one in every county, but we just have kind of claimed this. So hopefully you recognize some of the organizations that have come together. Canal Alliance, our congregation is involved with Canal Alliance, my agency, Community Action Marin. There's a group called Housing Crisis Action, which is more business oriented. Legal Aid of Marin, Marin Organizing Committee, which we are a member of. They're one of our partners. The Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, which brings together housing people, a lot of retired city planners and folks involved in the environment. If you want to get into the nitty gritty of a lot of these issues, go to their website, sign up for their e-news. They put out a weekly, what's happening on housing in Marin. It's fantastic. North Marin Community Services, and West Marin. So we're really, those are the original folks, and we're adding to that. We're building a bigger table of coming together for this. And so we have a campaign. And so a lot of my time in the weeks leading up into the election, and have been, is really working for how do we connect with Marin voters to inform them about BAFA, to inform them about the impact of affordable housing on all of us. I come to this from values around justice and dignity. Someone else might come to this because the local economy is the most important thing. And we're doing a lot of work. And so you'll be seeing, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you'll be seeing videos that we're putting out of the idea that, like, let's have peers speaking to peers from our community. So we have business leaders who have, whom you will recognize, who have agreed to say, yeah, I'll get behind a microphone and a camera. You can videotape me talking about why, as an employer, affordable housing is important for me. And a superintendent, why, as an educator, affordable housing is important to me. And people who work in the medical field, that type of thing, as well as so employers, but also people who their own personal experience, how affordable housing made it possible for them to live and work in Marin, or some of the challenges. So that's an ongoing piece of our work as a coalition, is to really inform, engage with the public, in part because we feel this is such a, again, once in a generation opportunity that is before us, and also because there's a lot on the ballot. And so there's confusion, there's a desire to kind of just be like, I don't know, it's just, or don't want to engage that way, but really wanting to try and elevate this as a really significant, unique opportunity. Next slide, please. So here are some of the things that we're talking about in terms of ways people can engage. And I just invite you to reflect on these, of which of these, what, if any of them, really speak to you and resonate to you, that you can bring your energy where it is for you. And everybody is doing different parts. So some of these, so our coalition has a website, housingforallmarin.org, and we've been inviting people for months to endorse the bond measure. So first tier was elected officials. So we have, you can either go on the Housing for All Marin or the Bay Area Housing for All, and you'll see all the people who've endorsed. All of our supervisors have endorsed, a lot of city council members have endorsed, school board members, et cetera. Individuals, you'll see my name, my agency's name. So we're asking people to endorse because it's a show of support. And if you have somebody, a public figure in community that you trust on different issues, because we can't all dive into the weeds of everything. And you're like, I generally agree with how Legal Aid of Marin sees things. I'm going to pay attention. So you can see if there are folks like that who have endorsed. So that momentum of showing that list is important. We're going around and speaking to groups, to, again, the Rotary Club, your book club, what you get people gathered who are curious about this issue, to talk about in various levels of detail. So we've got some folks who can dive into the weeds of, general obligation bonds. I'm not one of those people, but there are people who can do that, or into the kind of building and what's happening. We've got a lot of units in Marin in the pipeline, ready to go the second that there's funding available, but they're waiting and they're getting more expensive every single day that goes by that they can't be built. And so it's not like this is going to be a 5-year ramp up. We've got projects ready to go, ready to fund. You can follow the Housing for All Marin on your socials. We're trying to take pictures out in community, post stuff. So amplifying, we're trying to really amplify and reach folks with information for people who are interested. We're not aiming to convince people who are not into affordable housing. Okay, we're really going to focus on folks who are undecided. We've been getting a lot of information from folks doing polling regionally on this. There's a whole machine behind this, as you can imagine, of political consultants and polling. What we're finding with the polling is that it's right on the bubble of the passage mark that it needs to be. And so it's going to be tight of what that is, but that the community is responsive and open to messaging and thinking about the values that they hold is really impactful. But one of the barriers to this passing is Democratic homeowners. So I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but Democratic homeowners will vote. A lot of Democratic homeowners will be like, affordable housing. I don't know that that's my issue. I don't know if I care about that. I don't know if I think this is really a solution. Folks who are renters are much more likely to vote for this, and different populations, but they're not as likely to vote. So as it gets, in this education time, the focus, the target is Democratic homeowners. And when we get closer to the election, it will be renters, communities of color, turnout, turnout, turnout. So this is our campaign strategy, which I find fascinating, the way that Scott finds courts and things. That's for me, it's like, okay. So, we are going to be doing a training in August around Get Out the Vote for people who, like we do postcards here, we call, we text. We're going to be doing that with our neighbors here in Marin County to really turn people out to vote. So there's training options if you want to get involved that way. Letters to the editor, commentary about what you personally see, care about. I think we all know folks, whether it's ourselves, whether it's our family members, friends. We've had friends in this congregation, I know, who have left Marin County to retire, to be near family, children who couldn't come back to Marin and live because they can't afford it, wanting to be by grandchildren. So we all have connections to this. My agency, as I mentioned, is doing this video series. We have an email update. You can sign up for it and just get our Housing for All Marin, information to stay connected. And there's a plan. So Marin Organizing Committee is working to plan a Faith and Action Days in October, where they're going to try to mobilize the religious community, the faith community, to do some sort of an event. It's not fully baked yet, but that's another way that we might be able to engage. So I think there's a lot of different ways, and I'm happy to talk with folks offline to really engage with this issue. If you're a voter, there's a way you can engage, but there's a lot of other things that we can be doing, if so inclined, to really help increase people's awareness and understanding of the issue. Next slide. It might be the last one. It's the last one. Okay. So again, yeah, I just appreciate everybody's presence here online and in person. And I know that this is an issue that our congregation cares about and has been involved with, in different ways, through REST and other ways that we're looking, to provide sanctuary. And so, yeah, I just appreciate the interest and attention, and welcome questions or anything else. Yeah.
And if there are questions for the folks online, just type them in the chat and I will relay them.
Okay, that's okay. Yeah, Marita.
Does this have to pass by a bare majority or a higher than that majority? And what happens if Santa Clara passes it, but Marin doesn't?
Great questions. So, yes, what makes this even more complicated is there is a statewide measure on the ballot. It has been called ACA 1, and then it was ACA 10, and it will be, I believe, Prop 5 is what it is now going to be officially. And that is about reducing the voter threshold needed for infrastructure bonds or affordable housing bonds. So this is a 1-2 game. That has to pass in order for BAFA to be only able to pass at a 55+1. If Prop 5 does not pass, we have to reach a higher threshold, and generally speaking, the sense is we will not. So later on in the campaign, we will be talking about both. There's a whole separate campaign political stuff going about Prop 5 that we are not doing yet locally in Marin, but we will, because they are connected, definitely. If one count, we have to pass as a collective of the region. So we've been hearing lately from the political analysts, Marin needs to do better than its own. So we don't want to just get the bare threshold for Marin. We want to do a little more, because we know that some of our sister counties are not, the expectation is they're not going to reach it. So that's the aim, but it's as a whole, collectively, we need to. If it passes in Marin and not elsewhere, it's a balance. It's the calculation, which again is not my expertise, but yeah. Margie?
Well, I have a personal relationship with nearly everybody in this room. My situation. I represent the homeless. I'm a rich homeless, so it's not a choice. And I don't know where I fit in as far as my voice, and I'm curious because I want to join the initiatives. How I view Marin County, my family moved here in 1911. So we have property here and so forth. So I'm generational. My dad was born down the street. I see this area as similar to Italy or Amsterdam or the Amalfi Coast, somewhere that's very precious and is saturated. So I'm not in favor of more building. But I am really in favor of keeping what we have so that those people who are, I don't know what the word is, on the cusp of not being able to stay are in, I don't know what the words are, but there's a culture here that I want to keep, and it means people who live here and have homes where they're renting and they've been here for years. I want to preserve it. That's the campaign I'm behind. And I'm gonna be fine, but I don't like to see tents and villages and so forth. I feel like our laws need to be very clear that we want to keep what we have and make it really beautiful so that people can visit and come and see it. That's where I am. Maybe you can answer where I, which one I'm in.
Well, I think that your interest in the issue, that's great. I think that I think the way that the BAFA bond is structured, production of new housing is part of it. It isn't going to be separated. So that is part of it. And I think there's a lot of information out, just kind of looking at, again, this is an area outside of my expertise, but back in maybe, I think it was the 40s or 50s, there was kind of a grand plan for Marin County. And there was half of that plan was to build housing along the 101 corridor. We did part one, and in the moment I'm blanking on, it was the land preservation. So 85% of land in Marin County is preserved. You can't build on it. This doesn't change that at all. This isn't going to change that. So that 85% protection, because I think at the time, and many of you were here, you could speak to it, was that we didn't want Marin County to become blanketed with housing like, other counties around us. People really valued that. So that 85% was protected, and we all know that that is still there, and there's a very strong fight for that. The second part of that agreement or that plan was that we build housing along the corridor so that we had the housing we need. And we as a community did not fulfill the promise of number two. We protected the land and we did not build the housing. And so that is the legacy that we have now of where we've been building a fraction of the homes. We're welcoming, people to come in and do some of the jobs. So I think that that's the understanding of where that comes from, of that idea of that it's not just one solution. It's got to be multiple. It's got to be the different pieces, taking into account what Marin as a unique community. We aren't the East Bay. We're not going to be. It is unique, and there are values that people have here, including the preservation of land that are maintained. Yeah.
That leads kind of into my question, which is, I hear developer, and I think of the big buildings, the one at Fifth and Lincoln that's going in, which is big. When you say developer, could it be also small developers who are interested in building 10 units? So that, we've got a lot of apartment buildings here that fit really nicely. And I don't hear that reflected in the kinds of things I hear, developer meaning big.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is because it has a scare factor, right? So people who don't want anything, it's easy to be like, we're going to get a 15-story. That's never going to pass in Marin County. But I think your question is, the answer to that is to be developed during the public process. So that, what do we want to do with this money? What kind of building do we want to allow? What kind of development do we want to allow? Is it building, some affordable units in a bigger thing, like the redevelopment that being planned for Northgate Mall, for example? Or in communities, is it, a 4-story, like a walk-up, or, and so that's part of that local planning process. This doesn't commit us to any sort of, you know, particular scale or whatever. And it doesn't waive all of the local processes that a production for development needs to go through, which always involve public process and comment. So it doesn't waive it. This simply creates a pot of money. That's what the bond does.
I have something that's more just to think about, and I wonder how the process for receiving this money in Marin County, how racial equity will be a part of that. And I'm particularly thinking about our neighbors in Marin City. How will their voices be incorporated? And Stephanie Moulton-Peters is not the answer to that, but how will their voices be incorporated? Because, you know, as I look at housing issues, I support the big housing development that would be in my neighborhood, which is Carroll and the North Gate. I don't support concentrated housing being dumped in the already dense and environmentally overstretched Marin City. And Marin County historically has done just that. So as we're advocating for this, which I am, I'll sign on and endorse, how do we also make sure that Marin County won't do what Marin County always does and what Stephanie Moulton-Peters and others have voted for in the past?
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, she did not vote for B25 Drake, so I don't need to blame her for that.
Yeah. So the county has already, county staffers, not electeds, county staffers have already started a process to do listening sessions because they're just getting ahead of the game, whether it passes, whether it doesn't, to meet with, and we're hosting one of these, of renters who are overburdened. So people who, this is their lived experience, this is part of their solution. For landlords who are going to care about this. So a variety of different constituents to do listening sessions and really be bringing that in. And I think just like with any other public process, it's how we all engage, how all of the voices and we mobilize together to have that be part of the public process for determining it. And that's an ongoing thing. Yeah. Bryce?
Who actually has responsibility for spending the money? Is that part of the process, or is it the county decides who has the authority to spend the money?
So my understanding is that it basically creates a pot of money that the county, as it determines its process, people can, like developers can come and apply for or access that funding. So the county will be essentially giving it out based on that, but it's very dependent on what that process.
The county being the board of supervisors.
Yeah, I mean, those are elected officials,
There's
but
no special board or special organization.
not that I'm aware. But it's not to say that Marin couldn't, as part of our process, say, we're going to set up the BAFA bond subcommittee and we're going to make it with residents and landlords and, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Gina, for doing, this is great.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Just one quick, how many of the 90,000 units would be in Marin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if they've broken that number down. There is a report on BAFA, or BAHA is the coalition's website, that there's a group called Enterprise did. And I'm happy to look for it and send it to you because I have it somewhere, but they've done the analysis county by county for things like how many projects are in the pipeline. Like if we had money today, how many are ready to go? What's the cost of producing a unit by county? So they've done a lot of breakdown and analysis. I don't know if they've gone, I mean, that 90,000 is built on something. So I would imagine whether they just took an average dollar amount and worked backwards. But there are, again, a lot more in the weeds that I could point you to, but I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, if there's a number by county. Yeah.
What mechanism will there be? Because what I hear is a lot of developers won't develop affordable housing unless they have a component of what they call fair market housing. So it seems to me that a lot of times what happens is you get more fair market housing than you do affordable housing. So what can this bond do to make sure it's all affordable housing and not giving that, you know, that carrot to the developers?
Yeah, the reason why developers do that is just to make the math pencil out. They can't build without that offset of cost because there's no funding. There's not no funding. There's not enough funding to just do affordable development. But this creates a funding stream that I would imagine one option is there's less requirement to do that balancing act. Do you have, go for it. I see.
There are developers like Eden and EAH and so forth that have been trying to build housing here, and it is really hard because of this, trying to cobble together all the funds. I worked on a project that is in Fairfax, that it took them so long that Marin actually basically apologized for how long they held it up by giving them most of the funding gap that had developed over that long stretch of time. If the money were there, then the developers who are doing 100% affordable projects would be able to take advantage of it. I don't think, if a developer like Cyrus Regis or somebody wants to develop here and is gonna give 10% of that development to be affordable units, they don't need the money as much, but the money would be available to that little 10%, I think.
I just,
Can we get the slides?
Sure.
I wanted to share some comments that are coming from our online folks. So Tom McAfee has suggested contacting the San Anselmo Town Council, who may be interested in hosting a workshop on this issue. And just so Tom knows, there's some talk with MOC and the seminary about doing such a workshop. So that's underway, but he specifically named the Town Council. And then Courtney says, it's my understanding that each municipality will be able to apply their own design review commission or planning commission standards.
Yeah, Barb.
It's $200 per million.
Mhm.
How many, that goes forever, or what's the deal on it?
Yeah, I think it's, and this is a range, but I think it's, what I've heard is 30 to 50 years out. It's a long term. Yeah, 30 to 50 years. Mhm.
And my issue is I'm worried about insurance. I'm a homeowner and I'm worried about being canceled.
Mhm.
And if it's canceled or it jumps up 30% or 50% or something, that's where my money's gonna go.
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know? And if I have to make a decision whether I can insure my home or I can give $200 a year for this, I'm probably
Yeah.
gonna insure my home.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again. Yeah, Margie.
Are there people working on inventive, creative ideas that we haven't thought of? For instance, out of COVID, there are buildings that are now vacant that could be residential. Are people working on that?
Yeah, there's one perfect example in the Canal, which is right down the street from where I used to work. It's like kitty corner from the health and wellness campus that's there. And it used to be like an insurance thing back in the day. It's 4 stories, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's being redeveloped currently right now. It's sat empty for a while. And so, yes, there are pockets of that. The challenge with that, again, is the funding. Is, especially if folks want to do it all dedicated as low income or affordable housing, typically they're nonprofits and they don't have the bank to do that. So that's part of that.
That particular project faces a couple other issues that have to do with the quality of the building because it was abandoned for a while, but also the new requirements for housing to be outside the floodplain and things like that. They're actually building the ground floor up to have, because it was, one of those too tall first story things. They're building the ground floor up to keep it out of the floodplain so that those units aren't gonna get flooded. And those kinds of things make it hard to take an older building, a business building, and turn it into housing. But there are lots of people who are seeing that same challenge and looking at it from different ways, like people who make kitchens that are all one unit and you can plunk them down in what used to be an office and make it a home. That kind of thing, it's happening, it's out there.
Okay. So Gina, thank you very much. Josh might have even more ideas than when you and I talked, but you had a slide up there that had things you can do. And that was a ways back in the presentation. So what you know of your family here, us together and individually, what are one or two things that you would invite us to consider first for engaging in this? And they could be on the list or just, for First Pres San Anselmo, Church and Society, the good people in this room. What are one or two things that we could do then?
Yeah. I think one is to plug into the work that's happening. So whether we, endorse and then get connected to, or just get on so that the information as it's coming out and the campaign is shifting so that we're plugged into that. And I'm happy, I am a representative. I am happy to be a representative or a liaison on that so that we are connected to the effort. And then I think right now we're trying to just amplify and get the information out. So all of us have networks of people that we know. We have neighbors, we have folks who we might know care about some of the same issues that we do, to be talking about, sharing things, whether there's emails, there's socials, again, we really want to have people hear about this and be, pointed to reflecting and thinking about what it really means, because we have a choice. I mean, voting is a choice of what direction that we want to go as a community. So I think our involvement in doing that together would be great. So there's the MOC they're calling civic academies. If we want to host one of those in the fall, to just then be able to all of us invite our neighbors, invite our friends, invite the broader community to come and sit and think together about housing and what our values are and what our personal connection, what we want to do together. Those are a couple. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, everybody.